Shalom, Mr. Pipes. Thank you very much for participating in our new project, Talking Israel.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. I want you to know that a lot of our activists and volunteers know you very well. They see you a lot in YouTube lectures and performance, so it's very nice, and people are very happy for this interview, and they are waiting to see it later on.
Thanks so much.
The first question that I wanted to talk with you is about Israel in general. Tirtzu became the largest Zionist movement in Israel in the last few years. In our opinion, it's not only because we defend and believe in Israel as a Jewish state, but also because we believe Israel as a Jewish democratic state. We believe this is the classical Zionist value, a Jewish state, but a democratic state with equal rights for minorities, and that provides human rights and security for all the minorities in Israel. And we believe maybe this is the reason that we became so big and have so much support from the Israeli society and decision makers. And we love Israel as Jewish democratic state. And now what I wanted to ask you as the first question is how you see Israel in general. You are a specialist in Middle East, you are a historian. How do you see Israel?
I see Israel undergoing a remarkable development in the last 15, 20 years. If you look at the late 1990s, you see a country that was weak politically. It was making concession after concession. Think of Barak's concessions at the end of his term in the year 2000, early 2001. It was running out of water. The birth rate was going down, and other very major problems. And then somehow, in the next few years, all of this changed. One sees now a strong Israel politically. One sees an Israel with more water than it knows what to do with, as well as other forms of energy, And finally, and perhaps most remarkably, the birth rate has gone up in a way that's unique. No other developed country has ever seen such an increase in the birth rate. So these three and other factors suggest to me that Israel is undergoing a renaissance. Something remarkable is happening. There are other indications as well. The per capita income, the political and diplomatic relations around the world, high-tech industry, the classical music ventures, and so forth. Israel is flourishing in a remarkable way.
So, of course, I agree with you. I think that Israel is also a very stable country and a strong country. But from the other side, you see the challenges that are around us. And the first one to touch is, for example, the theological challenge of Islam to accept Israel's existence in the Middle East. And so how do you see this challenge? From one side, you have Israel, a stable country, a strong country. From the other side, it's surrounded by such a big challenge to accept its existence. So how do you see it?
Well, the resistance of the neighborhood to the Jewish state, Jewish homeland, Jewish state, Yishuv, Israel, has been consistent for a century and more. Nothing much has changed there. One could argue that in the aftermath of Oslo, there was more acceptance than at any other time, and it's since reduced. But there are also positive signs now. The Israel-Saudi relationship, Israel-Egyptian relationship are quite new and quite remarkable. So basically, I see this as unchanging. The neighborhood is unfriendly. There are exceptions to it, but the challenge remains. Now, in the old days, it was more nationalist, pan-Arab nationalism. Today it's more about Islam, but these are just different ideologies. The hostility remains roughly the same. I don't see any real chance of that changing. Unless the Palestinians were to concede defeat and accept Israel, which would then spread to the rest of the region, I don't see that fundamentally changing. So the Palestinians, although very weak economically and militarily, are very important politically. And until they concede, until they give up, until they accept a Jewish state of Israel, the rest of the region is not really going to do it.
Now you touched a very important issue that I wanted to discuss with you. In the early 90s, the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin talked a lot about the perception that peace you have to do with your enemies. And this was the Oslo Approach. You need to do peace with enemies. Since then, you present something that in the first look can sound maybe a little bit the same, but totally opposite, because you said that it is true that peace you can do with enemies, but when they are defeated.
Former enemies, yes. You make your peace with former enemies. Take the United States and Germany. We did not make peace with Hitler. We made peace with Adenauer. After Hitler's defeat, we made peace with Germany. And likewise, elsewhere. You can't make peace with enemies so long as they're enemies, by definition. If they're enemies, you can't make peace with them. Only once they've stopped being enemies. Whether they've given up because you have shown them you cannot be defeated, or for other reasons they've lost the will to continue, they first have to give up. So Rabin made a huge mistake. It sounded good, but it was fundamentally flawed, and Oslo was fundamentally flawed. And indeed, the proof is, 24 years later, that the Palestinians are, if anything, more aggressive and more hostile than they were in 1993.
Do you think that the American government, the American approach, was like in Israel, was like Rabin's perception, or and it is like this now, or they also more today more understand the Israeli side and more understand that the need to defeat terror and to win this battle before we can continue? How do you see the approach of the Americans to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
For 45 years, from the establishment of Israel in 1948 until the Oslo Accords of 1993, for 45 years, there was a constant tension between the U.S. and Israeli governments. The Israeli government was always saying, we have to be careful, we don't really believe them, we have to go slow. And the U.S. government was always saying, try it, give it a chance, hurry. This is constant tension. And finally, with Oslo, the tension came to an end, where the Israeli government accepted the American government approach. It made an agreement with Yasser Arafat, of all people. Well, it turns out the Israeli government approach historically was the correct one, not the American one, not the one of Oslo. And one sees this approach, this divergence, this tension, re-emerging, especially under Obama, but even under George W. Bush, one could see it. And now it is there, but because the Trump administration is still so new, so unsure of its own policies, we don't really know if those tensions exist now or not. On the one hand, the president has made some statements very favorable to Israel's approach. On the other hand, he has taken actions which are not so favorable. So it's unclear. I would note that there has been a significant change in the American approach towards the Palestinians. Until now, for the last 20-some years, the American approach has been to say, Israel, give the Palestinians more. Always. And once in a while, there would be a statement to the Palestinians, hey, Palestinians, you should do something too. But that really wasn't very important. It was always Israel, more, more, more. What the Trump administration seems to be doing is saying, yes, Israel, give the Palestinians more, but it's also saying, hey, Arab states, give Israel something. This is sometimes called the outside in, sometimes the free option, whatever you call it, there are two sides to it. Israel gives to Palestinians, Arab states give to Israel. I think this is much better. I, in fact, advocated in an article in 1990 in the Wall Street Journal. Nothing much came of it for a long time. It does seem now to be policy. I think it's less good than a completely different approach of convincing the Palestinians that they have lost this war. But it's certainly better than the traditional approach of the United States government always saying to the Israelis, more and more and more, and never asking anything of the Arab states. This is better.
Mm-hmm. But so how do you explain that you promote this idea almost from the early 90s, like very strongly, especially because of the Oslo idea, but only now you see, I think, the results. A lot of people today, I think, talk much more about the need to win, the need to defeat not only the terror as a tactical challenge, but something very big. How it happened so much time after?
As I suggested earlier, I think there's been a fundamental change in the Israeli body politic. It's much tougher. It's less willing to take chances. It's less willing to give to the Palestinians. And so the mood is now much more open to a victory idea than it would have been when I first thought of it in 1999. It was very, very marginal at that time. Today, I think it's relatively essential. Many of the parties in the Knesset polls show quite a bit of public support for this idea. In other words, there's a sense that the diplomacy that's been going on for decades now is not achieving anything. The Palestinians are not becoming less hostile. It is not working. It has to be a different approach. And so I'm hoping that one day an American president, this one or a future one, will say, you know, team, what we're doing isn't working. Do you have another idea? And at that point, because we have intellectually and politically prepared the ground, the answer will come, yes. The alternative is for Israel to win and the Palestinians to lose. And by the way, this is not only good for Israel, it's not only that Israelis can go to a pizzeria without worrying about being killed, it's also good for the Palestinians. Arguably, it's even better for the Palestinians because they now live in a backward, repressive environment. And once they stop focusing on harming their neighbor, Israel, but instead start building their own polity, economy, society, and culture, once they start focusing on their own lives, things will improve greatly. So the Palestinians have even more to gain from their own defeat than the Israelis. Again, I use the German analogy. The Germans, for a long period, from 1870 to 1945, wanted to rule Europe. When they gave up on that ugly dream, they became a productive and much happier country.
Now, you know, when I talked with my activists and told them that I will talk with you today, it was very important for them to speak with you about the BDS phenomena from within, the anti-Zionism from within Israel. And I think now it's a good time because we talked about the Islam challenge and then in the Palestinian challenge, and now it's the time to go a little bit deeper. In Israel, unfortunately, we suffer from dozens of organizations that are very small NGOs, Breaking the Silence, B'Tselem, etc., that promote blames against Israel, that Israel doing war crimes in Gaza, ethnic cleansing in the Negev, apartheid in Judea and Samaria. Lots of organizations blame Israel from within, try to convince the Israeli society that something is profoundly wrong in our country from within. And we are seeing that this phenomena is not an authentic one. The money comes from foreign governments, especially from Europe. We are seeing the New Israel Fund. So this is a very big challenge that because they don't, if those organizations don't even care if they will get support from the Israeli society because they get their power from outside. and they're trying to change us from within. My question here for you is, the first one is, how do you see this phenomena? And the second, how do you think we need to approach it?
Let me put it in perspective. Israel faces a large number of challenges. If you go from the most violent to the least violent, it's weapons of mass destruction, conventional war, low-intensity conflict or terrorism, demographic challenge, people, economic boycott, and finally, delegitimization. The idea that Zionism is a 19th century ideology that has no place in the 21st century. If you look at these six, WMD, conventional, terrorism, economics, demography, and delegitimization, really Israel has quite successfully dealt with the middle four: conventional war, terrorism, economics, and demography, all pretty much going well. It leaves just two: weapons of mass destruction, particularly Iran, but other problems as well, Syrian chemical weapons, and delegitimization. Well, weapons of mass destruction are a topic of their own. Something that most people can't do much about. It's really a matter of high government policy. So that leaves BDS and delegitimization as the key battleground. It's not a battleground of soldiers and weapons. It's a battleground of ideas and attitudes. And here Israel has generally not been very successful. As I like to put it, who would have imagined a century ago the Jews would be the great soldiers and Arabs would be the great publicists? Bit of a surprise. But in fact, Israel has been weak at public relations, hasbara. I think there's beginning to be a change. I think the Israeli government, Jewish institutions, pro-Zionist organizations are waking up to this problem, whether it be on American campuses or British electoral, European electoral politics, or within Israel itself. And Tirtzu is one very important manifestation of that. As I describe Tirtzu to others, I say it's teaching Zionism to Israelis. And then I add, you would think it's natural, but no, it's something that has to be taught. It doesn't come with the water. It has to be taught. So your organization, NGO Monitor, and others are developing the tools, the ideas, the information. Parliament is responding to it. The public sphere is trying to figure out a way to contain this foreign influence on Israel. It's difficult. What is the democratic way forward? What is permissible? What is not? In what ways can the government limit freedom of speech or activity that's legitimate? What ways are not? In many ways, this is a novel challenge. We have some of it in the United States. Europeans have some of it around the world. You see a bit of it. But Israel's a small country. It has 20% of its population that is Muslim and Arab. It offers an opportunity to influence the politics of the country that is unique, and the Europeans, as you pointed out, are taking advantage of that. So it's an ongoing topic. I think the Israelis have woken up to it, and the success of your organization is one indication of that waking up.
You mentioned the campuses. I think that one of the challenges in this issue is that a lot of leaders and strong activists in those organizations are professors in the academia in Israel. This made the academia in Israel very problematic because, as you said, you need to provide people, to explain people what is Zionism, to provide people the knowledge how to justify to themselves and later on to their kids and to everybody why Israel needs to exist as a Jewish democratic state, why we have a reason for this cause. From the other side, you see the penetration of those people to the academia, and what is happening is that really people, hard for them to explain, because no one is teaching them how to deal with the propaganda. They don't know the answers. So what we are seeing is like the academia in Israel, of course not 100%, but the dominant people in the academia in Israel are very, very far to the post-Zionist. How do you see this? Because as you said, it's a democratic state. You cannot change it. So what can we do in this challenge in the academia?
Well, first of all, it's a universal phenomenon. You find the same thing in Japan and India and Norway and Canada. The university is far to the left of the country. And not just university, the rest of the school system as well, much of the arts, media, and so forth. This is not something unique to Israel. What is special to Israel is that the issues are more immediate, the stakes are higher. In Japan or Norway, they're not the same sort of issues that Israel faces. I think it requires what one might call adult supervision. It requires the government, the alumni, the foundations, the politicians within the Knesset to pay attention to these issues and to address them. And I think this is something we're now seeing. For example, Miri Regev is paying attention to these issues in a way that prior ministers did not do. The Israelis are waking up to this problem. The solutions are difficult. And as I said before, in many ways, Israel is on the front line, on the cutting edge of trying to figure out how to contain this problem. But I'm pleased to see that it is an issue now. 15 years ago, it was not. It's just the way it was, and really no one protested. The sort of organizations like yours did not exist then. So there is progress, and I think continuing to work at it, continuing to find new methods, founding new universities, coming up with new publications, new film festivals, new artist colonies that are not dominated by the left is a very important part of this, and one sees that happening.
Let's jump for a second to a very general subject. 100 years ago, we saw also a collapse of ideas. The Russian Empire was dying, and then it was the Bolshevik Revolution, and the communist idea became very strong. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, and then we saw, I think in 1929, the establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood, the political Islam was born. In Europe, we saw also in the 1920s, because of what is going on in Europe, Germany was very weak after the Great War, the Nazi ideology and the fascist ideology in Italy. Because of deep changing in the world, lots of radical ideas took place and took control on the societies. And I think this is one of the reasons of the Second World War. What we are seeing today is also collapsing of ideas. The idea of nation Arab states collapsed. Now we understand now that if you are taking Arab society and say this is a country like Syria, they will not become a people. They're still very much different groups, and they really hate one each other. So this idea collapsed. The alternative was much more radical, the Islamic State. We don't know what will be the future with it. So this is collapsing of ideas in front of our eyes. In Europe, we have no idea what will happen, in my opinion, in the future of Europe. The cosmopolitical idea is under a very big challenge. The multicultural idea is under very big threat. Open borders. Now we are seeing the refugees coming, and we don't know what will happen there. In my opinion, also the United States a little bit try to find its future. What are the values that the Americans defend? What defend the Americans? So they also try to find, in my opinion, because the Obama administration and the Trump administration, in a way, present a little bit different values, in my opinion. I'm not American, so I don't know exactly, but I see the Americans also try to find a way. So now we are seeing a very dramatic changing, collapse of ideas. What do you think will be the future of the world? Where are we going in the next years?
May I limit it to the Middle East, not the whole world, and talk about the future of the Middle East? You pointed to 100 years ago. It's striking to see how the 15 years between 1912 and 1927 or so saw huge changes in the Middle East, a region which had been very static. For the 400 years before 1912, little had changed. The Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and so forth, not much had changed. And then suddenly, in the course of 15 years, everything changed. Empires collapsed, new ideas, Balfour Declaration, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Muslim Brotherhood, and so forth. The Pahlavi dynasty, Ataturk, a whole series of new institutions and new ideas came in. I would argue that the century since then has been devoted to trying to figure out what to make of these new institutions and new ideas. Is Israel a permanent fact in the Middle East? Is Lebanon? Is Bahrain? Is Kuwait? Is Yemen one or two? Is Turkey in Europe or is it in the Middle East? Do Syria and Iraq make sense as states? And so forth. There are fundamental issues that have not yet been decided. Are you an Egyptian? Are you a Muslim? Are you an Arab? What is the most important affiliation you have? Are you Phoenician? Are you Mediterranean? There's so many possibilities. So the Middle East is in the throes of working out these fundamental questions that were raised a century ago, and especially exactly a century ago in late 1917. And we're nowhere near the answers. It looked for a moment like Syria and Iraq had disappeared. Now it looks like they're somewhat re-emerging. We have a referendum coming up shortly on Kurdistan. Maybe there's going to be a breakup of Iraq, not sure. All these fundamental questions remain in place. It's very hard to predict. I think the Islamic wave, which began 9 years ago, which I think peaked in 2012, is now on the way down. I think Islamism is in trouble. And I think that for two main reasons. One has to do with its unpopularity among the people it rules, and the second has to do with the incompatibility of Sunni and Shia and monarchist and Republican and violent and non-violent. They're fighting each other everywhere.
And do you think that the Israeli policy need to be more active or much less active to not touch anything in this storm? What do you think need to be the policy of Israel in this kind of changes?
I think the Israeli policy has been correct, which is to stay out of the way, to protect its interests, such as a recent aerial attack on the chemical center at Masyaf in Syria, to do what's necessary, but otherwise stay out of the way, not pick favorites, not get involved. Israel is unusually stable, modern, democratic, rule of law. This is something one doesn't find in the rest of the region. It's an island, it's a strong island, and it's best with strong fences and strong defenses, and staying out of the fighting and hatreds that are surrounding it to the best it can.
So, are you optimistic or pessimistic on the future of Israel?
I'm optimistic about Israel's future. The main threat is from Iran, and it is a serious threat. I'm sorry that back in 2009 or so, the Israeli authorities did not get rid of the Iranian nuclear threat as it did the Syrian and the Iraqi. It was an opportunity that was missed, or even in 2012. It might still be possible, but I think the only way that the Iranian nuclear threat can be dealt with is by destroying it. I don't think money or boycotts or diplomatic agreements or anything else will do it. And I look to North Korea, 25 years of United Nations resolutions and boycotts and sanctions and so forth. There's been starvation, there's been terrible, terrible price paid, but the government has insisted on that price being paid to build nuclear weapons, and it has succeeded. I believe the Iranians will do the same. The only way, in either the Korean case, or now it's too late in Korea, but the only way with Iran, maybe too late there too, is to destroy it. And there are only really two countries who can and might do it, and it's Israel and the United States. The Israelis maybe can do it, probably can do it, I don't know. The United States certainly can do it. I don't see the will to do it, and I worry very much. So other than the Iranian nuclear threat to Israel and beyond Israel, I think Israel is doing well, and I'm optimistic for it.
Although also the challenges from within, also with the new anti-Semitism and the BDS, when you analyze all the information, when you see it, you're saying Israel will prevail, you see a strong future, but you see the biggest threat to Israel is the Iranian challenge, the nuclear challenge of Iran.
That's one. The second one is the Muslim population of Israel, which has not accepted Israel. And whereas Israel can defeat the Palestinians, meaning the West Bank and Gaza, and cause them to give up and focus on other topics, it cannot defeat the Israeli Arab population. It has to be won, it has to be brought in. And that's a process that hasn't really succeeded so far. And I think is a very significant challenge to Israel in the future. I also think the Haredim are a major problem for Israel. I hope that the recent Supreme Court decision to tell the Haredim, you're part of the army like everyone else, will succeed. One way or another, the Haredim, who are becoming an ever larger part of Israel's population, have to be integrated in a way they have not been. So these two very important elements of the Israeli population, who have nearly half the children in kindergarten between the Arabs and the Haredim, have to be integrated in a way that has not happened yet.
Okay, now I see that we're almost done with the time. So now I want to ask you, please give us a message to the activists and the members of Tirtzu. You know, they're working hard, they do it with no salaries, and they're doing it from the bottom of their hearts, and they're doing, I think, a very great job. What message do you want to say to our volunteers and our supporters?
Well, ever since I met Ronan Cheval many years ago when Tirtzu just began, I've been very impressed by the organization. And I've helped with the funding of it and trying to help with getting the ideas out in the United States, because I think it has an essential role to play in, as I say, teaching Zionism to Israelis, reminding Israelis, or for the first time teaching Israelis, what the Jewish state is about. And I think Tirtzu's success in universities and beyond is of the greatest importance. I urge members to be active, and I urge more to become members, because this is a vital organization.
Mr. Pipes, Daniel, thank you very much for this interview, and God bless. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom to you.